You know what's fascinating? While 115 million people are screaming at their TVs this Sunday, there's this entire shadow population who genuinely could not care less. And I'm not talking about people pretending not to care for attention. I mean the folks who see the Super Bowl hype the same way you might see, I don't know, competitive butter sculpting. Just complete emotional neutrality. And here's what people miss. For some folks, the Super Bowl just doesn't register the same way at all. So let's get into it. First thing you need to understand is that caring about sports isn't some default human setting. The brain doesn't pop out of the womb programmed to lose its mind over a touchdown. What's actually happening when people get obsessed with the Super Bowl is this whole tangled mess of tribal identity, feeling like you personally know the players even though you absolutely don't, and there's actually a term for this, basking in reflected glory. Basically, your brain can give you a dopamine hit when your team wins, even though you did literally nothing except exist on your couch in the right zip code. For people who don't care about the Super Bowl, watching that happen to other people is like, okay, cool, I guess. That particular trigger just doesn't land the same way. There's actually some interesting research here from the Journal of Consumer Psychology that found people have wildly different optimal stimulation levels. Some brains crave high-intensity, emotionally charged experiences, while others find that same intensity genuinely aversive. Neither is superior, they're just different frequencies. So when someone tells you they don't care about the Super Bowl, they might not be trying to be contrarian or edgy, they might just be someone whose nervous system prefers lower intensity experiences. The chaos and emotional stakes of a 3-hour game with constant momentum swings genuinely might feel exhausting rather than exciting. And here's where it gets psychologically dense. Humans are tribal by nature, right? We survived as a species because we formed groups and competed with other groups. Sports tap into that primal group identity thing. I know that sounds dramatic, but the emotional response to my team won versus their team won follows a lot of the same patterns as ancient in-group versus out-group dynamics. But not everyone experiences that pull with equal intensity. Some people might get their sense of community from book clubs or niche online forums about mechanical keyboards, or literally anything that doesn't involve watching grown men give each other concussions over an oblong ball. They're not rejecting community itself. They've just found it elsewhere, in spaces that don't require them to memorize quarterback statistics or debate whether that was actually a catch. Now let's talk about something that might explain part of the disconnect: locus of control. There's this concept in psychology where people develop either an internal or external locus of control. Basically, do you tend to focus your energy on things you can influence, or are you comfortable investing emotionally in things outside your control? Think about what happens when you watch a game. You're screaming at a screen, you're manifesting a field goal, you're wearing your lucky socks, but none of it changes what happens on the field. Some people are totally fine with that. The emotional journey is the point. Others might find that fundamentally unsatisfying. They'd rather spend emotional energy on things where their effort creates a direct outcome. Neither approach is wrong, they're just different psychological tendencies. Oh, and let's not forget the elephant in the room: overstimulation. Seriously, nobody ever talks about how modern life already feels like you're being pummeled with notifications, deadlines, random texts about some TikTok you haven't seen, political dumpster fires, and money stress. For a lot of folks, the Super Bowl is just another thing trying to hijack your attention and emotional energy. Like, can we get a break? Especially for people who are wired a little differently, the ones psychologists call highly sensitive, which is apparently, like 1 in 5 of us? For them, Super Bowl parties are basically a 3-hour-long sensory assault that leaves them wiped out for days. The lights, the noise, the endless chatter. What's a party for some is a full-on endurance test for others. And here's another thing. Nobody really talks about how much people vary when it comes to handling uncertainty. There's research showing that people vary dramatically in how comfortable they are with unpredictability and ambiguity. Sports are fundamentally uncertain. You never know what's going to happen, and that's supposed to be part of the thrill. But for people with lower uncertainty tolerance, that same unpredictability might feel more like stress than excitement. They're not enjoying the suspense. They're just uncomfortable the entire time. And when you combine that with the fact that the outcome literally doesn't matter to your actual life, sitting through 3 hours of manufactured tension for zero payoff starts to feel less like entertainment and more like voluntary anxiety. It's the same reason some people love horror movies and others can't stand them. Different nervous systems have different relationships with stress and uncertainty, even when it's just for fun. And then there's this big deal everyone makes about tradition and ritual. The Super Bowl isn't just a football game anymore. It's this massive cultural production with the commercials, halftime show, all the themed snacks, the whole circus. If football doesn't really do it for you, all that extra hype just makes things worse. It's like being surrounded by people pretending to be super into something you just don't get, and you're supposed to join in and talk about the ads and pretend you care. Feels kind of fake, honestly. You end up watching everyone else get worked up over something you find totally random, and that weird disconnect can leave you feeling like the only person in the room who missed the memo. It's not just boring, it's kind of lonely in a way that's hard to explain. But let's be real about something else. Sometimes there's no deep psychological explanation. Sometimes people just don't like football the same way some people don't like cilantro or techno music or true crime podcasts. We've become so obsessed with pathologizing every difference that we forget humans just have different tastes. Shocking, I know. The person who doesn't care about the Super Bowl might be deeply passionate about Formula One or Olympic curling or literally anything else, and that preference doesn't need a neurological justification. The expectation that everyone should care is honestly weirder than not caring. What I find most interesting is how uncomfortable it makes people when someone says they don't care about the Super Bowl. There's this immediate defensiveness, like you've insulted someone's mother. And that reaction tells you everything about how sports function as identity markers in our culture. When you reject the Super Bowl, some people hear it as rejecting them, their values, their entire social world. It's not actually about the game. It's about belonging, shared experience, and maybe some anxiety that if too many people opt out, the whole thing loses its cultural weight. So if you're someone who doesn't care about the Super Bowl, there's probably a mix of factors at play. Maybe your optimal stimulation level runs lower. Maybe you prefer investing energy in things you can directly influence. Maybe you're just not wired to get excited about competitive sports. Maybe you find the manufactured spectacle exhausting. Maybe uncertainty feels more like stress than fun. Or maybe you just genuinely find it boring and that's the entire explanation. All of those are completely valid ways to exist. And if you're someone who lives for the Super Bowl, that's equally valid. We don't all have to experience the world the same way. And honestly, that's probably the only reason society functions at all. You can have 115 million people losing their minds over a football game, while another massive group is perfectly content doing literally anything else. And somehow we all coexist. That's it. That's the whole point. If this hit home for you, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives, hit that join button to become a channel member. I would genuinely appreciate your support.